Hi, everyone. So excited to be here, especially with my bookends today. We've got Karl Dakin, got Todd Dewett. So pleased. I've gotten to know both individuals really well and have a lot of admiration and respect for both of them, especially the value they bring to the marketplace. Chat's wide open. We depend on chat to kind of get us to a high value position. And, more importantly, depend on you to make us as relevant as possible going forward. So today's word of the day is leadership. And I think that's something we both can appreciate. Since Carl's our regular, why don't you go first, kind of bring us up to date, and then we'll bring our special guest back.
We're going to talk about leadership today, and Todd is teaching courses which I assume include leadership. So I'm going to ignore the audience today, and I'm just going to ask questions of Todd about how he does that. But I'm to bring you up to date. I'm jumping on a plane tomorrow to fly to Chicago. I'll be doing a very short 15-minute presentation on Wednesday on crowdfunding and crafting offers through crowdfunding for customers. And I'm very interested in taking something like this, which is a nugget of knowledge that I've built over time, and figuring out how to reduce that to an educational program that could be presented in other venues, which is still not on the topic of today, leadership. So getting back to leadership, um, Don and I have had a number of conversations in this program over time, and we talk about leadership as kind of going out there and getting stuff done. But doing it by yourself does not constitute leadership, which is a common trait of an entrepreneur, is to do the lone wolf, the Lone Ranger kind of approach, and instead of working within a team. And as we talk about leadership, part of leadership is working with multiple people, communicating, getting everybody working in the right direction, the same direction, so that you get more achieved than you can do by yourself. So, as a person who works with a lot of small businesses that are going from startup to scaling, changing leadership is a tough transition point because we often find that the founders of the company have no background or skill or training in leadership abilities, and they either have to learn them in a hurry or they're going to need to bring somebody on board who has that background in order to be the point person or lead person to move it up the ladder. So it's an interesting challenge. It's not something everybody does naturally. There are a lot of skills to be learned. And any business that wants to go beyond a lifestyle mom and pop that works with all kinds of people everywhere, leadership is going to be a key to being successful in making that happen.
Great start. Now, Todd, been waiting for a few weeks, maybe a couple months to get you back, but your value continues to stay long after you're physically not in front of the camera. So why don't you bring us up to date on what's going on and your initial thoughts on leadership?
This guy, such a flatterer, this guy. Um, I'm great, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm always doing the same mix of things, to be honest with you, working on courses, writing a book, going to the next speech type of thing. I'm getting on a plane in a couple of days, going to Minneapolis, big ag organization. The thing about me, when you study leadership and people and relationships, is kind of my focus. This was not by design. I'm not that smart. It turns out to be a skill set, just like Karl was saying, that almost anyone, small businesses, doctors, lawyers, ag people, tech people, everyone needs to understand the basics of from self-awareness to communication, conflict, motivation, all these core people issues that really make up the leadership umbrella. So what would I say about leadership to start? I just build on those comments he gave that were spectacular and say it's really amazing that people don't find out until it's too late sometimes that the skill set that functionally makes you successful in a business role, whether you're an engineer or a small business person trying to make your product work initially. Those are not the same skills that are required to run a team. So if you're successful and all of a sudden you got to run a team now, you have to start thinking about interpersonal dynamics and the basics of relationships and the fact that everyone is different, and you have to really start up a whole new learning curve. So good for you that you're smart on the business side, but you are capped out, strangely capped out in terms of growth if you don't also start getting excited about understanding relationships.
And that is so well put, and I think it's a valuable takeaway for everybody to understand, is that in a dynamic world, you have to be ever changing and ever optimizing just to keep up. It's like sometimes going up a down escalator, right? It's all about how do you build momentum and get over the hump. So Karl, I know you had some questions you were just mentioning for Todd. Love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, we may have to talk with Todd offline because this may be all about me and not about the audience. So we'll be careful on how far we go with that. But one of the challenges I also see in leadership is that the current term of leadership is sometimes limited to your employees, and it's defined as top down or interaction with people below you. And I've been working with Don now for many months on creating what I'm calling my community and using a broader definition, which is me supporting people who support me, whether it's in my job or in one of my projects or working with a charity. And I include in community anybody who wants to help me. And so that goes beyond staff, that goes to anybody who could be in my larger team of directors, advisors, but also customers, and also people who are in the same industry with me in supporting businesses and raising funding. And so the challenge of leadership I have found is that, sometimes we step into a void in the market where there is no solution, and you're going, hey, I'm going to form a new team, we're going to do something, but now it's kind of a pickup game where we're saying we don't even know what the player positions are. We haven't defined those. And communication and leadership, I think, gets elevated or it becomes even more critical because if we don't get things figured out, if we don't figure out how we all work together to mutual benefit, this project's going nowhere.
Yeah, there's no shortage of examples of good ideas, well-crafted services or products, et cetera, that don't find the success they should otherwise find. And sometimes people say, well, the marketing was sort of off on that or something. But the truth is the marketing is usually off because of what you were saying, which is the underlying people dynamics. Things were not executed properly. A great plan may have existed, but its execution and how setbacks and errors and misunderstandings were handled was subpar. The best laid plans, don't always work because humans are the ones executing it. You're absolutely right.
Well, I think that, a lot of it is nuance. A lot of it is being aligned and being relevant that makes the difference with leadership, with the people you're with. And, that saying is make as many people successful as possible and you make yourself more successful. So, I've always been intrigued because Karl is a adjunct professor at a couple colleges here in Colorado. And I know your background, Todd, was in education that came kind of through an indirect route. It's fascinating. I'm always impressed. Do you want to share a little bit about how you got to where you are?
Well, yeah, I miss being in the classroom for sure. I worked for Anderson, now Accenture, and Ernst & Young for a fairly small number of years before getting the itch to be a dork and deep dive on some of these issues in a way that you don't have a chance to at work every day. So I got a PhD at Texas A&M, did a postdoc there, and then I was a professor for 10 years in Ohio at a school called Wright State University, which was a delightful decade. Published a lot of research, really got to work on that dorky stuff and got deep in the details of how people dynamics impact life at work. Was a dean briefly, and then weird things happen. Long story short, as you know, you make a plan in life. Life's got its own plan and it laughs at you. the phone started ringing more and more for people wanting a speaker, and that grew into something that was competing too heavy with actually trying to be an employee for the university. And I eventually made the decision to go full-time as a solopreneur. About the time I was struggling with that decision, LinkedIn discovered me. How? Long story, but it happened, and it makes me very lucky. And so I found I continue to this day being a teacher, right? But now I've got millions and millions of people watching things instead of 30 people sitting in a classroom only. So that's it. I'm the luckiest guy you'll ever find. I studied some things that I just love, and I found out later they're just so relevant to everyone. And if you're any good at talking about them, it can actually earn you a living. So I feel huge gratitude even explaining how I got here.
Well, that's terrific. It impressed me from the minute we got the chance to get to know each other. And, it's great. We talked about residual benefit, but it's really the residual benefit that continues to grow and benefit so many people who get a chance to take your courses, listen to your speeches. So everything seems to bubble up and bring huge value. I know it's a lot harder to get things rolling, and I guess that's where people have to start building momentum. So, Karl, what drives you to higher education?
Like my daily newsletter and my successful live stream show, I see that sharing knowledge about what I know to people who may benefit from that is my way of paying it forward, or letting people know that I do care and hope that they can succeed. And as Todd was, pointing out, there's only so many butts and seats in a classroom. You can only help so many people at a time unless they're into live streaming the classroom. And so moving to these other mediums where I can share more knowledge with more people at one time, from an engineering standpoint, that's highly efficient, but it's building greater social capital in my account, where I may potentially help more people at one time. So it's interesting as we work with sharing information, from my standpoint, because I'm truly a practitioner. I'm a blue collar shovel digger kind of a guy. I run over here and work on it until I figure out what I didn't know and what I should have known, and maybe I can crystallize that into a lesson I can share with someone else. And then I have to put on my other hat and run over here and say, here's my sharing hat or my educator hat. And I can't do one or the other. I have to do both because I want my information to be current and up to date. And in some of the fields I work in, that's one of the key things of value is having something that's contemporary as opposed to something that worked 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's so important. And, what I'm starting to appreciate is shows like this where now we come together and we're able to build synergy between us, right? So now we have exposure at a much higher level to a much broader audience that is specific to the moment, since everything we're doing here is spontaneous, non-scripted, whatever comes to mind, whatever the audience brings to the table. And with that said, let me introduce the quality audience so far. Dennis Brackfeld, another gentleman from Colorado, 49 years in the same heating and air conditioning business. That kind of tells you something about pivoting and reinvention. Happy to be here too. It's Monday. Is this show today? Familiar and exciting, knowledgeable, and happy to get over the hump. Harvey Tuck, if you don't know Harvey, you should. He's just an amazing individual. Came on about 7 months ago. 4 months ago, launched a franchise show. It's now the #1 event in franchising on LinkedIn. Then launched his second show on Thursday, which is telling brand stories of franchisors, and joined our group. Karl's part of the group. We've got a cohort group that meets every other Thursday for live streamers, for knowledge share, for self and mutual promotion. It's just going great. So it's really aggregating and then really directing as a group where people can go. And I think numbers make a difference against bigger numbers. Jason Gerardo says, good morning all. Jason's been on about every other Wednesday, is really participating. And my philosophy is doing more with less players instead of less with more players, and really gaining traction among all of us. And plus, it really proves itself out in front of people, because the idea is if they can do it, I can do it, or it can be done at least. Kicking off a great week of conversations and community. Just want to mention Harvey's show is right after my show on Tuesday, so feel free to watch it. Todd, a lot of opportunity here. How does one choose?
It's funny. A lot of people who follow me know, I'm not trying to get into a conversation here, but my wife has been ill. She's struggling and she's doing very well. But the whole journey has knocked me off my game, as happens to all of us when we face family challenges. Because I'm watch you and 100 other people finding your version of these online conversations, and I'm motivated. One of the few things I can do at a superpower level is talk. So I'm just looking for the right way to do that. I have a podcast or a live system in front of me. I know, because I have a lot to say. I just haven't found the time and the exact model, so to speak. But I say all that to say thanks. Keep doing what you're doing. The lot of you is proving that this is a viable, fun thing to do. So thanks, man.
Well, thank you, Todd. And one thing I've learned over time, and I've learned more on the way down than I've ever learned on the way up, is stay humble. Appreciate that, humility goes a long way, especially in leadership. I think people get more comfortable when it's a more comfortable, safe environment that people can create. Karl, back to you. I know we've been working for about 7 months pretty closely, and have really been able to distill a lot, because I think that's the challenge when you get overwhelmed. It's so easy to feel like you're in a buffet and everything tastes good, right? How do you get disciplined in saying yes and no?
Oh, that's a question that may take weeks to answer, because it's going to reflect the fact that I still have a tendency to see shiny objects everywhere, and I'm always trying to deal with opportunities. I have people bring me projects that need funding all the time, everywhere from Africa for a charity last week, to a guy who's putting together installations of electric vehicle charging stations. And that's just last week's new things on the block. And I only have so much time. So I have a kind of a regimen that I set up, which is I get up in the morning, I look at everything that I could do today, and then I have to prioritize it. And by definition, that means I'm going to have to cut things loose. I'm going to give people a deadline and say, you need to do this by this date, or I can't help you. Or at the very outset, I have people come to me, and I've created what I call a quick assessment. It's a form that they can download from my box.com account. It's just basic information any business should have readily available to show to anybody or answer questions at any time. I say, if you would please fill this out, then I can determine if I can help you. And if they don't fill it out, then they have self-demonstrated that they are not helpful or helpable. It's not a word, but we'll skip over that. I'm sure Todd has a word for that, but we'll come back to that. So it is a knowing yourself, and Todd used the word self-awareness. Leadership starts with knowing what you're capable of, what you want to do more than other things, and where you fit in, or where you can bring value in your relationship with other people. And there's just one of me, and there's only so many things I can do. If I'm out with the shovel in the ditch, I can only help so many different people at a time. So I have to constantly filter, refine, and either move a project forward or cut it loose.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. What's your thoughts on that, Todd?
I love that. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think my favorite part, I'm hearing a little feedback. Can you guys hear that?
A little bit.
A little bit. If it becomes a problem, tell me. You said prioritize. There's only one of you. You got a lot you want to do, but what can I do? My wife makes fun of me sometimes. I have kind of the king of the obvious. I have 1,000 different rules, maxim ideas that I share with people. None of them are complex. But people are busy and they've never been trained properly, which always gives me an opportunity and makes me amazed that we don't educate people properly to think about some of these issues. One of them is prioritizing. Hey, there's a million things I might want to do, but what's the subset that's actually doable, and in which sequence, and why should I do them? Sounds so basic, but it is so ridiculously helpful for busy professionals to think through every day. Small business person, solopreneur, a manager in a big corporation, same thing, limited time and energy, how best to maximize your use of it. A little bit of thoughtfulness, planning, reflection at whatever time day works for you to do engage simple thoughts on ideas just like this one absolutely is a hallmark of a more productive person for sure. So I love that that advice you give.
Well, that's terrific. And, I see it as how do you optimize how and what you do, not how do you add more to it? Because ultimately there has to be some life balance. Right? If you take too much time and attention away from other important parts of your life, you'll find out that the benefit incrementally you gain from one more gig versus one less exposure could be significant, because we're all talking scalable, sustainable, building on something for the future versus a bunch of one-offs. So, I think being disciplined and knowing when to pivot is important. Knowing when to give something up in exchange for something better or different or more enjoyable. Karl?
Yeah, I have a trouble with the word pivot. I think it's a word that's been adopted into our society in a positive fashion. And I think I would prefer to treat pivot as a fallback, or I can't get to where I want with my primary objective. So I need something that allows me to salvage my investment, my time into whatever I'm doing. But it seems to be an excuse for people who come out of the box with no plan and hit the wall, sometimes almost fatally, if not fatally, in terms of a business sense. They go, oh, I pivoted at that point. I'm like, you didn't have a plan to start with, so I don't think you can do a pivot at this juncture. I said, what you're doing is trying to adjust to reality, which you should have been looking at maybe a little more precisely before you jumped. But it's very hard to figure out how to move this forward all the time, because some things take more time to develop. Sometimes you need that tenacity, that perseverance, that patience to see things through to the end. And too often, I see young entrepreneurs who are in the grass is always greener image of, oh, I got into this, man, this is hard, I'm going to quit and go do something else. And you're like, yeah, it's all hard. And if you ever want to accomplish something, you're going to have to stick to it long enough to realize the benefits. And so it's a very, very difficult thing to look at something and go, do I stick with this one more day, one more week, one more month, one more year? Or is this something that really can't work? It's not a good use of my time. I need to cut it loose and go do something else. I hope Todd has a formula, because I don't.
Oh, I wish I did, friend. We're mixing a couple of issues here, and they're really interesting. One was the word balance, and this is still I assume you both know this. I mean, my focus, as opposed to small businesses and entrepreneurs, usually is corporate people, folks working for a paycheck, managers, senior managers, things like that. Balance is hard. As a small business person, you're correct. You have the liberty that most employees don't. They have really clear bounds to what they can and can't do within a given role. But a small business owner can ace that project, build into that one, reinvest in that one, and make tough decisions and let the consequences be what they might. But they get to make those decisions. And corporate folks they have job insecurity. And it's much, much, much harder to say, I know what we should do and what I would do, but I don't have the power to do that. I haven't been given permission to do that. I could do it and ask for, just apologize and hope they don't fire me. So those decision-making power is a huge part of that difference between those two worlds. And then I really want to propose to you guys this. On balance, I've gotten in trouble for this before, but we know Americans are usually tied or close to the top for working hours. That's been true for 30 years as far as I know. So what do we do about that? We see that work is killing people. And I don't know how true this is for small business people, how many hours they clock relative to paycheck people over here. I'm not sure the comparison there. But I do know that work is killing people, and that compared to a lot of countries, we don't do a lot in terms of time off and other types of employee support that's common in other industrialized countries. And so the big mantra for 20 years has been, well, don't kill ourselves at work. We need more balance. And then I would say this, though, put on my old MBA professor hat. I would say, yes, I agree. But the truth is, there's limited opportunities every time you climb the ladder. There's fewer now ahead of you, and you've got to stand out. You've got to do what it takes. You will be making sacrifices. You will be working more than others. Otherwise, you're welcome to being good, not great. I always said some version of that. And it sounds harsh to some of their ears. I'm very curious how you guys respond to that. Are we supposed to really be mandating 35-hour weeks? What do you say to the superstars who want to work 70 hours a week because they love this and they have no balance, and they're showing everyone that they have no balance because they're a dedicated employee? Those different mindsets. So what's your take on helping people find balance?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think, Stephen Covey said in his book, 7 Habits, you should start with a goal in mind already, right? And I think the other element is, how do you measure success, right? Is it a financial measurement? Is it a vanity or ego measurement as far as title, position? Or is it a personal satisfaction element? And I think that separates the qualification between work and play. Some people could invest their time in something and never run out of the joy or the pleasure they get. And sometimes Monday becomes the worst day of the week for them, and they try to crawl into Friday. And I think that's where most people get. And it's a lot of times because of how they chose or what they had to choose from. Some people in life just get pot luck, right? They get out of school, a cousin offered them a position, 30 years later, they're still there.
Yeah.
Right? And I think at that point, one has to re-examine their situation. And because there's so much diversity, dynamic nature, there is no one true answer except, are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you comfortable? And how's the rest of your life fitting in? So I think those factors really bring to mind, we're talking about going out and touching a lot of people. Well, how many people touch us, right? If you're just one against many, well, you've got a lot of power, a lot of influence, but how much influence is being brought to bear on yourself? And that's where collaboration groups, masterminds, especially if you're aligned, like-minded, the key is, how do you cut to the chase? How do you get to where you're going faster, easier, better? And it doesn't have to be tenuous. It doesn't have to be tedious, especially if you're the captain of your own ship, right? If you get to choose versus chosen for you, then that's a different dynamic to it. I know we're covering a lot of areas, but it really should take a lot of considerations into mind when you not only choose to do something, but chart against it or measure against it. And if you had a goal, and maybe sometimes goals are too ambitious, too aggressive, or when you start out, you don't see all the bumps in the road, and now you got to take a detour, you got to sit still for a while. So Karl, I know, by raising money for people, part of it is to help them achieve their goals and their dreams possibly. How do you play, let's say, a more significant role in guidance and support for them?
Well, good question, Don, but I'm going to ignore it for the moment.
Please.
I recommend every entrepreneur the book by Clayton Christensen on how do you measure your life. And my reading of the book, which is not always the way everybody reads a book, but I took away from this book that you can't do life balance as an entrepreneur in the classical sense of a teeter-totter where you're trying to get them to level out. As I understood his book, you basically have two lives. You're schizophrenic. You have your business life and your personal life, and you have to create an independent plan for each, because there's one source of, which is you, for all the things that are going to happen. And so if you have a plan for your business and you have a plan for your personal life, and they're competing against each other for you, then this gives you a better capability of setting goals, milestones, all the things you should do in your personal life in the same way that you do them in your business life. And at that point, what I have found is that by developing and maintaining my personal goals, whether they're supporting a charity or doing something with my wife or kids or any other thing, they're on the chart, they're on the calendar. I pencil them in, they're scheduled and blocked, and I don't mess with that. And if I do have to make an adjustment, then I go into the savings account. I go, I have to add more time back later to offset what I took out over here because I'm borrowing against my personal time if I have to do that for my business. And so this can lead to good fun. It can give you that outside life that's not all engaged in your business. It's not dependent upon all your clients or customers or projects to make you happy, to satisfy you in what you do, because you can do something outside of that, which is fulfilling and makes life worthwhile. And then if you're successful in business, that's the icing on the cake.
Hey, Karl, if you don't mind, I got to piggyback on that because I just love those comments. And what I heard is a theme in there, looking at your outside of business life in some similar ways to how you look at trying to become successful in business is utterly useful. And I couldn't possibly agree more. So when I get into studying business, especially people dynamics and those things that I'm focused on, it took me a few years before I realized, holy cow, 95% of this stuff applies to life, not just life at work. And you just got me thinking about how oftentimes for go-getters, I will say, well, there really is no balance. Remember the old saying, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. There's some truth to that, but that doesn't mean everyone around you is going to love it the way you do. And if you're a go-getter and you're doing above average hours, here's how you're going to survive. It's not guaranteed, but it's listening to Karl. You have to look at your loved ones, not unlike you might look at your team, meaning this is one of my favorite words, you have to set expectations. They should never be surprised by what you're doing. They should understand it. That means you have to use explanations and thoughtful communication to make sure they're clear about why you're doing what you're doing. You're not simplistically absent. You're doing something they understand, and they understand its purpose. And then keep your word for the scheduled time you are doing things with them. That's vital, because if you keep that, then they're going to believe you more and more while you're not there and you're working. So it's hard to do, but when you bring them into the conversation, instead of just telling them, I've got things to do, I'll be back later or next week, it's entirely amazing how much different or how much better they'll accept the hours you're clocking.
Yeah, I think Karl was so smart in not answering that initial question, because we would have never had all this value that's been generated. And, there's kind of a saying that you can't fight a war at work and a war at home at the same time, right? And I think by what you mentioned, Todd, is you have to have buy-in, right? People have to fully understand why you're doing it, and you need to understand why you should adjust to it based on the feedback. Right? Because it's only so much better if someone says, hey, I'm behind you 110%, whatever it takes, I'm here for you. Right. You're doing great, keep on going. Versus, the negative aspect, well, we missed this, I'm going to miss that. And all of a sudden, even if you're successful on the business side, you feel guilty on the home front. And the other way, you could say, okay, well, I'll accommodate and do whatever it takes to make everybody happy. But now you're in a compromising situation when it says, well, I'm going to have to turn down that gig, and that was important to me, and I got to turn. And pretty soon, support turns into resentment or frustration, right? And now you're digging yourself a whole different hole. And I think getting everybody on the team together, whether it's in business and you're in leadership, whether it's at home and you're showing leadership. And what I learned about home is that if you take care of it, it's a gig that you never have to give up, right? At work, there's always another speech. There's always another book. There's always the possibilities. Yeah. And again, it depends on who you're working with, right? There is no universal or absolute, but it also tells you that some people grow different and faster than others. Sure. And it's harder to keep joined when someone says, I'm not into that. I'm not into that either. I'm not into that. then you've lost a lot of foundation. So, Karl, it seems like, there's a lot to consider. I think being older, wiser, more experienced gives you context, where a young person just sees, what's that?
Who are you talking to who's older and wiser? Because we're
Only
just
me.
young at heart. We're still foolish. So.
Well, and if you can laugh, I think that's 90% of the battle, whether you're at work or whether at home, right? If you are humble, if you are sincerely interested in how someone feels, right? That's saying no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And it's not just saying it, it's doing it. And then, maybe compensating, saying, I'm going to surprise my wife today, I'm going to do all the housework. Right. So when she comes home, it's like, because everything is a goodwill bank. You're either adding to it or, and what I learned about 46 years of marriage is every yes will get you another yes in the future, and every no will get you another no in the future.
All right, man, you're baiting me. You didn't know you're baiting me. I've got to jump on that.
Please.
So since I realized years ago that what I do actually applies, well, I'll just say significantly to life in general, not just life at work. I ended up writing a book. There's some people in Hollywood tried to make me famous, didn't happen. But they encouraged me to write a book about relationships, and I did. It's called The 10 Delusions. And one of the things I couldn't hammer hard enough is to tell people, even though you're right about goodwill, is that you don't keep score. You don't want to have good math on those bank accounts. They exist, I know that, but the more we start obsessing on how much I contributed versus how much they contributed, this happens at work too. The more we start to see a game with very imperfect vision. Because how do you correctly value the different contributions that we're making is a fascinating conversation, whether it's inside a team or a marriage. So if you're not willing, this is how difficult relationships are and why I have a career. If you're not willing to not know the precise balance in that account, if you're not willing to happily not know it and say to yourself, I'm not going to keep score, I'm going to continue to do the right thing until together we do the right thing, then believe me, relationships, whether it's marriage or being a manager, will be very difficult for you.
Great point. And I think too many people major in the minors, right? And if you really play well, the score takes care of itself. And there's nothing wrong with being the better person.
Sometimes,
right? People who can do twice as much for the time and trouble someone takes to do half as much, that's fair, because nothing's ever really 50-50. Sometimes someone gets 20%, they need your 80 to finish the project, or vice versa. And I think the other thing is, if your intent and purpose is to make someone happy, and they become happy based on what you do, you won and they won. You don't have to win again, because then your intentions are not that pure. It's really more manipulative. I'm going to do this, and then they're going to see this and then do something back. But you're also linear at that point. And if you expand beyond the one person to 10 people, you'll never be able to cover everybody as well as really teaching people how to see things in ways that you might be seeing things, and now everybody gets the same perspective. Karl.
I'll just say I agree with Todd. You do not measure the fine points in dipping into the goodwill bank that you described. You better know when you're overdrawn. You better know when you're digging deep into that account, because you're going to need to fill that back up and overflow it in the other direction. It was one of the things kind of my wife pointed it out to me, and one of her, Karl, wake up, what are you doing? I commonly start a project where I'm investing time. I'm trying to figure it out, trying to give it some framework so I can determine if I'm going to prioritize it or if I'm going to make it part of my life or not. And she says, well, you spend all this time with people that goes nowhere. I go, yeah, that's part of the problem with my job, is I never know which project's going to move forward until we get deeper into it. And she kind of indicated like, well, you should do that more on the home front. And I thought, there's some advice I'm going to take home and use and apply. because yeah, there's things you do on the home front. I did some time in the yard this weekend because I knew my wife would enjoy what I was doing and how the yard looked, because the house is a reflection of her and who she is, and everybody who walks by the house is, they don't think of it as my house, they think of it as her house. And so you work through these things where you do need to have time set aside. You do need to figure out what you're doing, how much you're investing, but it's a pay it forward. It's not a pay it back. It's like I'll win this game if I get ahead of the game, not if I'm catching up all the time.
I think that's a terrific way of looking at it, because why not honor somebody with a responsibility that is something they're excited by, right? And if you're really distracted or involved in business or other things,
Right.
You'd like someone to say, well, I'm taking care of this, right? And you know what I also found is my wife's so much better at everything related to that and more responsible and practical that it's a pleasure to turn it over and allow someone to become more responsible, to think on how do I make this environment or this house a better place. And when you look at it, you know, half of that's a general number of what you do doesn't work. So if someone else only fails 40% of what they do, they're 10% ahead of you. And it's one less thing you have to deal with, because in most situations, when you're talking about a house and everything, it's usually potato, potato, tomato, tomato. Does it really make any difference if you want to go with yellow curtains or white curtains? And everybody has an opinion and everybody feels motivated to share it.
Right.
But it's like, does it really matter? Maybe there's only 2 or 3% where you run into a. Go ahead, Karl.
It does matter. It matters to your wife, and so therefore it matters to you.
I like to say it in our marriage. We say, you know, we say to ourselves, "Is that or is that not the hill I want to die on?" Or one of them. It's back to our earlier conversation about prioritizing. And I'm an old school guy in saying to people thinking about, well, your marriage relationship or your relationships at work, you know, 80-20 everything, Pareto principle. What's the minority of stuff that truly matters to you and has to be attended to and appreciated and understood, and make sure those are getting your attention first, and the rest are just hills you don't need to die on or worry about.
Yeah, that's perfect, because, you know, one of the best situations a boss has is not having to act like a boss all the time, right? Is to give somebody else some space, to trust somebody that maybe they know something more or they're more energized to take care of it. Because freedom is very important to a lot of people. Like you mentioned earlier, Todd, do I have authority? Do I have this? Do I have that? And pretty soon you're pigeonholed. And although you're being measured on your success, you're being pigeonholed in your ability to do that, right? So if you're following someone else's direction, well, part of your success or failure should be a projection on them. And I think that's why so many people are becoming solopreneurs or having side gigs, that they can start engineering something where they do have that freedom and control.
I think you're absolutely positively correct. At work, the word we use in my world is autonomy. People crave it. No one wants to go to work and be treated like a 6-year-old with someone hovering over them, telling them what to do. Same is true for a small business person when they grow enough to have a small team around them. Ideally, you get to say, I'm going to give you some room. Here's what I need accomplished. Go kill it. And then you find out about the truth about individual differences. Some people are going to need a whole lot more from you before they can kill it. And some are ready to go kill it. Everyone's different, which is a thing you learn. But you know, actually, believe it or not, can cause problems, even in corporate life. Have you ever heard this one? You, like you said, some people are efficiently hitting their 40 hours and they can't wait for balance and they leave. Others are like, I'm a go-getter. I love this and I'm going to do my 70 hours. There is sometimes for that person working 70 hours, not the promotion they thought that was coming, but a strange type of handcuffs. They often call it now performance punishment, whereby leadership sees this person and how capable they are, and then like to milk that some more for as long as possible and resist promoting them and losing them. So I mentioned that just to say that there are more handcuffs in corporate life, a place I study and still I'm fascinated by, compared to dealing with the small business. Now, the small business failure rate's very real, but you do get to drive the car and deal with the consequences if that matters to you. It mattered to me. It matters to Karl. That's why we do it.
Yeah, I think, and I think there's method to the madness to some extent. And, when people know there's a nuance or a facet they just need to identify and apply versus a whole full blown changeover or makeover. And, things done well compound over time. It's the little things where you don't have to go from 40 to 70. Some things are conditional, right? A situation arises, it's all hands on deck. We got to do what we got to do. And sometimes you got to put aside things that were balanced, get back to them, and vice versa. There's things on the home front that take you away from your work situation. And it's your ability to identify
Sure.
and to respond and to be good with it yourself, right? If you try to satisfy everybody, more than likely you'll satisfy hardly anybody, and it's not sustainable. Right? My feeling is if it doesn't have a future, it shouldn't have a present. So where is this going? What is, what's the investment? What's the potential return? And is life and reality sharing that result back to you to say, I'm going to stay the course? Or, hey, it was a good effort. I learned a little bit, and now I'm going to use this to roll it into something else. You're constantly being that venture capitalist for yourself, right? You have so much resources and you got to choose where you're going to play that bet. And then are you happy with it? And happiness could come from, hey, I helped 20 people get successful, didn't make a dime on it, but it was worth it, right? Or you're cause-based. And you say to yourself, well, that makes me feel good, because guilt is an issue that comes into play with everything we're talking about. If you neglect home, you feel guilty, right? You might put on a strong face. If you go to work and you're really not there and you get away with it, you feel guilty all the same, because at the end of the day, you come home to yourself and you put your head on that pillow and you got to ask yourself, how proud am I for who I was today and what I did? And is tomorrow going to be an extension of that? Karl?
Yeah, so no question. Thanks, Todd.
No, I gave up questions.
One of the things I think is important is that too often entrepreneurs, and I think it's worse when you're working for a large organization, is that your personal brand, your personality, who you are, gets lost or consumed into this large organization or into the project. And I was slow to learn that I could do all these things and nobody knew I existed as a person. I was either the guy on the team or I was the guy who was holding this job position or doing something else. And I realized that I needed to create two different personalities. One is my business personality, which is what it is. But me personally, I had to have a brand separate from my business. And so I started working on things that I thought were manifestations of myself and what I think and how I appreciate different things or don't appreciate different things. And I found that it gave me more of a foundation, greater stability in moving from project to project or going through a business failure, which early in life I took totally personally. It was all my fault. I don't know if guilt was the right word, but there's a lot of emotion wrapped around, well, what did I do wrong that put me in this position? And was it me who caused all this? And then as I started realizing that I'm still here, I'm like the unchangeable object. I need to work on me as an object and then work on the projects as an extension of myself instead of me being the center point. And that's probably way too metaphysical for today's discussion.
Nah, nothing's too metaphysical for this conversation. This is good. First of all, let me validate you on the corporate side. The idea of personal branding is becoming quite popular as people understand that we need to be great teammates. We also don't need to lose ourselves, to your point. But how much you want to invest in that just comes down to risk aversion in a lot of ways. I think of what's the difference between a lot of managers who want to start businesses and you who did, and part of it is that risk aversion. We make it sound easy. We're always talking to successful people when we have these conversations. So maybe it's imperative that I pick out something that you just said, which is that you've had things that haven't gone well. You've had your versions of setbacks, screw-ups, and failures. And I love talking about this. If we're talking loosely speaking today about leadership, it's one of my favorite topics. Yes, successful people fail all the time. They're just better learners. And that's really the main difference. It's not that they're most successful people are IQ geniuses. That's just not true. They tend to be better connected, better communicators, and great learners because they fail as much or more as anyone else. Everyone treats me so nice. I've failed so much. It's hilarious. Before LinkedIn made me business famous with courses, I had my own small version of an online learning platform that cost me a lot of money and failed miserably. And I've got another 20 if we had hours to talk I could share. It's important for people to hear that because leaders aren't trying to make others somehow mistake-free and perfect. Not in the least. They're trying to optimize learning and help them become a better version of themselves. That's a righteous goal. Make sense?
Yeah, I think, there's a saying, failure is feedback, and as long as you learn something and there is no outcomes, everything's a continuum.
Yeah.
Right. So everything either leads to the next thing or maybe changes the next thing. But knowing that it's a lesson a lot of people have yet to learn, maybe a lot of people will never learn because they'll never step out of their comfort zone enough to really feel the fire and know, there's another saying, if you're not working on the edge, you're taking up too much space. Right. So many people that always work between the lines, it's a safe, more comfortable environment, but you never know what's on the other side. And I think curiosity goes a long way. Why do you do it? I just had to see where the limit was, and I think that drives people. And at the end of the day, you look back and you're, depending on your personal attitude, if you're a cynic, a skeptic, and you're negative, everything can be viewed through that lens. If you're an optimist and just happy that you wake up every day and then life is a blessing and whatever you do with it is just more to it. So I think you have to be ready for other people to know you're ready. And you got to put blinders on at times and have tunnel vision where you can't get affected by the stuff on the side of the road. Competing with others, comparing to others is another challenge most people have. And I think the end up is at a certain point, you become unemployable when you've been independent enough and free.
I am definitely unemployable.
Yeah, me too. I discovered that because if someone says, where'd you just go the last 30 minutes? It's like, I'm out of here, right? Or what'd you eat for breakfast? I don't have to share that, and there's one more saying before I turn it over to Karl. It's better to be in the dark than move to the light and move back to the dark.
I'd like to go on record here saying that you need to go back to the 2 million streams that you've recorded so far and pick out all of the sayings that you use, because I think there's a future book colorfully explaining those sayings that'll do you some good. That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. But I'll be totally honest. Every one of those sayings I picked up from someone else along the way. But you're right. And I think people remember how you make them feel much longer than how you made them think or learn. And I think that's what being more of a human is, right? Is to make a difference for people in a small way that can make a big difference to them. And then your legacy is something you can be proud of, is that you gave as much as you could, as long as you could, and had a wonderful life along the way. So, Karl, we're on an uptick.
We are, definitely. I just celebrated my 70th birthday a week ago, and
Congratulations.
part of what I was doing in association with that is a few weeks ago, I ran a 5K race as a charity fundraiser, which was both personal and business, a little crossover there where I was able to get a little double benefit. And one of my friends asked me afterwards if I'd set a new personal record, and I'm sure he was referring to the fact of the time frame to do the 5K, which I was nowhere near a personal record. But my response to him was, I woke up the next morning after running the 5K. I'm 1 day older than I've ever been before. So that's my new personal record.
Very nice. Very nice.
Well, Todd, how has your attitude changed over time?
Well, that's a great question. I used to say, because I knew it was logically true back when I was trying to become a social scientist years ago, that we know very little. Someone asked me once, "Oh, what's the greatest thing you've ever learned? You're an advice guy and you went to school, college for 10 years. You must have learned something. What's the secret to success?" I've gotten many versions of those. And I always say, well, just realize how little you know. It's the truth, especially if you start becoming a serious expert in any given area, like a real expert. You realize how little you know. That which you don't know radically outweighs what you actually know. So I tell people that's okay. It's true. Number one. Number two, it's okay. And number three, leadership in some ways is about helping other people be okay with that too, while pushing them. I mean, therein lies one of the problems you're talking about, because you're talking about wanting to help people develop. The reason I have a career is because half, to pick a number, half understand what you're saying, both of you, about building other people. The other half are in it for them more than anything else, and don't value the community, the building other people, and that's a real problem in a lot of ways. And it's not because they're all evil, by the way, either. It's because we all have very different personalities that we were born with. It is our foundation that we start with. So leadership is about being open-minded to the ridiculous diversity of people that you're going to come in contact with, and it's leadership is about getting over thinking that because you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You can add that to your book of sayings. It's really obsolete. You have to be open to not knowing everything, and knowing that you have some learning to do about your new person you just got in a relationship with. And if that makes you too darn uncomfortable, you should probably just sit in a cube somewhere doing work instead of trying to lead people.
Good advice. Very good. Many valuable insights. So, Karl, now that we're coming up on top of the hour, and it's funny how an hour goes by so quickly when you're got a interchange of throwing the ball back and forth and building on somebody else's comments or thoughts. And what I love about it is it challenges you to be spontaneous and react to things you don't know is coming, and also allows the audience to see how you respond, because it's really an audition to possibly working with somebody. Is before they even have to connect with you, they see how you relate to other people, how you promote, support each other, how positive you are. And I think that's another reason live streaming is so valuable, is people see you as you doing things that has nothing to do directly with them. Karl, I know there were 7 questions in there, and you can make up your own answer to any question.
Yes, this is a technique that they teach you in law school. Is you listen to the question, and then you reframe the question, and then answer the question you want to answer. So I want to the point that Todd made, that half the people tend to be working, in their own self-interest. They're thinking only about themselves. I'm all about motivation, and I know that the reason to invest in anything is based upon somebody thinking that it will be in their own self-interest. The problem we have with some people, and I think this is an extension of a survival instinct that we grew up with, is we all tend to think, well, if I'm going to get it done, and this is an entrepreneurial thing, I've got to do it myself, or I've got to take care of myself first, or I've got to do something first. And part of the leadership role, to get back on topic for the day, I think, is training people to learn that working as a team and putting other people's interest alongside and sometimes ahead of your own is actually in your self-interest. So it's an investment that pays back.
Yeah, I think when you go the other way, it's more open field, as opposed to sticking with the same plan and doing for others what they're not accustomed to receiving, like a compliment, like a pat on the back, for even something that most people don't recognize. You're in a much better position with that person than someone who just takes things for granted. Or just like if you were a kid and you came home and you got a B plus and everybody says, what happened to the A here? Instead of celebrating the B plus. So now that we're coming up top of hour, Todd, I'll let you have final words here. What's your thoughts on what
Final
we did
words.
today?
Final words for anyone listening. It is not hard to listen to a fun, intelligent, meandering conversation like this one and get lost in the 30 things we touched on. What I would say to you is very simple. I would remind people, and this is fun to share because everyone thinks sometimes you're born leader or you're not, and that's just not true. It's better seen as a skill set that one can learn, whether you're talking about communication or understanding team dynamics, motivating others, dealing with conflict. These are skills that can be learned from me and a million others out there who are very invested in these ideas. You too, any of you, can take the time and go find out exactly how you're functioning, how others are functioning, and how you can function together a little better if you'll invest the time to build those skills.
Perfect. And, it's so great to be able to connect Karl with Todd and vice versa, because, that's where the real value starts coming in, is how do you introduce people to people other than yourself or ideas other than yours, right? And have that really grow in a synergistic way. Karl, we've got about 10 seconds. Any last words?
No, I'm just happy to be here, both in my business self and in my personal self.
Nice.
Well, you guys are just great to be with. I cherish the time we have together and look forward to many more times like this that we can build on. Want to thank the audience and look forward to tomorrow's show, which we will have Beverly, who's here every Tuesday, and she's got a wonderful lady, Kathy, who has the Golden Life community that she developed for women who are looking to be empowered. Wednesday, we got Jason Gerardo with Dave Snell, and Thursday, we got Kelly Stanecki. So full schedule. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Karl. Thank you, audience. See you in 23